Hello, everybody. My name is Sergey Sondolyak. I'm pre-sale engineer here in StarWind. So let's give a few more minutes to the people who come late. And while we are waiting, let's just, I want to ask you to type plus signs that you can see the screen and you can hear me. Okay, seems good. So this webinar is being recorded. We will send you the link to the recording after the event. Use the questions box to submit your questions during Q&A session. Today we will talk about disaster recovery, what it is and why would somebody care about it. You can live comfortably without any disaster recovery plan. So maybe you can even live happy life, but you better be ready when this D-Day comes, disaster day, as your disaster recovery plan can save you a lot of nerve cells or even job. Okay, by the way, it's me, your host today. And let's move to our first slide. So let's start from determination. What is disaster? Disaster can be natural and man-made. Examples. Okay, natural disasters. Not so much time ago, it was Irma hurricane. It can be a flood. There are things that you cannot always be protected from. You cannot state with 100% confidence that your production site will survive the next earthquake, for example. Nobody can on Earth. This is nature, it's unpredictable. The other side is man-made disasters. It can be fire, right? It can be any human factor. Maybe some mistakes during configuration process of your data center, like making some single points of failures during configuration, like transporting all network traffic through one network switch or so. So one person can accidentally or maybe even intentionally bring down the whole data center. A few words about business continuity. It means keeping all essential aspects of a business functioning despite significant disruptive events. So in today's world, business continuity is critical. You probably remember last year AWS S3 storage downtime. An official AWS report states that authorized team member executed a command which was intended to remove a small number of servers. As it usually happens, one of the inputs to the command was entered incorrectly and a larger set of servers was removed. And one of the subsystems that were deleted, one of them managed metadata of the all S3 objects in the region. So the whole region was down because of man-made mistake. It's just a quick example. Maybe it's not really kind of disaster, but this kind of things is a threat to business continuity. So there is some set of measures intended to protect or at least minimize a negative effect of a disaster. So we can distinguish preventive measures like fire protection system. You always have to have redundant power supplies. You have to have heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. And you have to configure your data center properly to prevent all these bad things to happen. There are also detective measures like data centers, smoke, and or fire alarm, some signaling systems, or some host health monitoring systems, and of course, corrective measures. Corrective measures are measures that have to be undertaken after disaster occurred. You have to restore the system after disaster. We will cover some standard, well-tested, well-known tools on today's webinar. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. There are standard disaster recovery options, so you can make backups to tape and send them to offsite for recovery later on, or you can replicate data to the cloud, and in case when you need you can always restore from the cloud, or you can configure absolutely synchronous HA system. And in this case, you will experience zero downtime in case of disaster. So let's start from the first, Hyper-V Replica, the first and the most well-known solution, the oldest and the most widely used in Hyper-V. So Hyper-V Replica. This is a built-in feature that comes as a part of Hyper-V role. First of all, Replica is for disaster recovery. That not for backup, just for disaster recovery. Hyper-V Replica is complete, ready to run duplicate of the source virtual machine. It can be actually switched on, and it can be up and running for a few moments. And when this happens, Hyper-V Replica assumes that the source VM is lost and unrecoverable. So when Replica is activated, it in some sense becomes the official copy of the virtual machine. Of course, Hyper-V Replica has a set of requirements. So first of all, it's, as I said, it's built-in feature that comes with Windows Server 2012 or later. You have to install Hyper-V role, and you have to have sufficient storage, and primary and replica servers have to be connected. Just to make sure that firewall has rules, especially for HTTP, HTTPS. So these ports have to be open, 80 and 443. And you need security certificate if you wish to use encrypted replication. Okay, let's move to the next slide. First of all, I want to mention that Replica is not a replacement for clustering or automated failover. The primary difference between Hyper-V Replica and the failover cluster, well, it is that Hyper-V Replica always maintains two distinct copies of the same VM. And in case of failover clustering, there is only one copy, but shared across highly available storage. Clustering requires steady, available underlying shared storage, as I said. So Replica doesn't require this common storage platform. It can be placed on the local storage. And another thing, failover clustering is designed to be automated. Hyper-V Replica shouldn't be automated. Also, you don't need to configure some quorum or file lock or other protection to prevent the source and replica from being brought online simultaneously. So Replica, Hyper-V Replica operates on assumptions. this is manual procedure. When you do it manually, you assume that the primary site is down. You assume, or you know for sure. So when the replica on the replica server is active, the primary site is down. So another thing, there is a possible split brain scenario. And when we move to the second part of our demo lab, we will probably touch this split brain. So this is actually the situation when both replica and primary site VMs, they work together at the same time. So all client connections will write to different sides. So simply speaking, it's a situation when data is different on primary site and replica site. Data loss is possible, and 99% it's inevitable. And another thing, Hyper-V replica is not universally applicable. Well, some technologies are incompatible or they make no sense to use with Hyper-V replica. You will never make Hyper-V replica of your Active Directory domain services because it uses much more improved replication technology. Another example, Microsoft Exchange or Microsoft SQL Server. All these roles, they have internal replications services. So you will not use Hyper-V replica to this kind of things. All right, so here on this slide, we see possible failovers. So with Hyper-V replica, actually, first of all, what is failover? Failover is actually the process of migrating of the virtual machine to the replica site. And after that, it will be started on the replica site. So with Hyper-V replica, you can make test failover just for test purpose. It can be used to verify that replica virtual machine can successfully start on the secondary site. It creates a duplicate test VM. By the way, let's move to our lab. So yeah, so here we have two hosts, SW demo 01 and 02. I've just connected over RDP. And as I said, Hyper-V replica is internal thing built in Hyper-V Manager. We manage both hosts from here, and we have Hyper-V replica virtual machine. It's up and running. Just a blank VM just to show you the concept. You can easily create it using GUI interface, or you can, use PowerShell. The thing is that it's very easy, and you can use it for scenarios not very complicated. So maybe some small data center. Yeah, we don't have any certificate. And as this is internal replication in one building, it makes no sense to use certificate-based authentication. Of course, if you're replicating over one or, between data centers, it's must-have. You have to encrypt your data. And of course, you can compress just to save some traffic. We will not do this. Yeah. And here we can select frequency. Only 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. We are limited here, so that's limitation of Hyper-V replica. All right, so this option, we can either maintain only the latest recovery point, or we can create additional hourly recovery points. So it clearly states that Hyper-V replica is not for backup purpose, because we can get only 24 hours late state of our virtual machine. We cannot move more than 24 hours ago. It's not backup. And of course, you can use VSS snapshots. This is mostly used for applications that have well, when talking about applications availability, must be used some more advanced technologies like Veeam or Storage Replica. Okay, let's move on. We can start replication immediately, or we can start replication at a specified time. So if we start replication, the initial copy will be transferred over the network, and your production can suffer of this. If there is a lot of data transferred over one channel, other services can suffer from this. So it is recommended to start replication at night, or maybe some other time when the channel is not so used. We will start immediately. And just confirm, everything seems fine. Let's go. Yeah, voila, it's here. And yes, this is Replica. If we try to start this VM, it tells us that there is an active copy running here. So here we can see some basic information about this replica. So primary server is the first one, replica is the second one, last synchronized, replication enabled. We cannot start this replica when primary site is still running. But we can start failover. By the way, as you've seen on the previous slide, Microsoft recommends to make test failover once per month, planned failover once per 6 months, and unplanned failover can be started from this site if primary site is down. So let's just play with it a bit. We can, if we start test failover, for example, VM instance will be created. So it's just virtual. It doesn't exist really. So it just approves that a virtual machine can be started on this site. Like this. If we see this test virtual machine, that means that test failover succeeded. Let's stop it. Okay. We can make planned failover. In this case, this VM will be started. This will be shut down automatically. And let's say primary site is down. So we will just simulate. We will stop Hyper-V service running on the first host. And we can start this VM. So now it should allow us, no, still not. Hold on. Anyway, after failover, you can confirm that this VM is the primary. Yeah, reverse replication. In this case, this one will be primary and this one will be replica site. Okay. And of course, just a summary of Hyper-V replica. Pros. So very easy to implement. No need to use PowerShell. No, well, extremely easy. It is free. It comes as a part of Hyper-V role. Well, okay, let's go back. You can configure network throttling. That means you can just limit network bandwidth sent. If you, let's say, if you wish to replicate during day and you don't want this initial replica, huge one, to take all the channel, you can limit this if you use separate replication network interface, you can limit bandwidths on this, and thus other services will not suffer. Yeah, and you can use it for replication between shared storage and local storage, like this. Okay, and weak sites. Only asynchronous replication, as we have seen, like 30 seconds, 5 minutes, and 15. There is no automated failover, so if something happens at night, you need a person who will do this. And as we have talked before, 24 hours maximum recovery time. If you, let's say, if you change VM settings, like add some RAM, this will not be represented on the replica side. I'm not sure if it's bad, because replica site and primary site can be managed by different people. So in this case, it's just, I will not say it's bad. It's just something special about Hyper-V Replica. You can reach actually split brain. So if there is no connection between hosts, you can run both VMs at the same time and have different data on different sites. It's not used, it's not applicable for some server roles. And yeah, scheduling is not so flexible. All right, the next one, let's talk about storage replica. Storage replica comes as a feature, and it's a new feature from Microsoft that came with Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition. It's not available in the standard edition. You need data center for storage replica. So it's not cheap. You need the license. And storage replica feature is exactly what its name might lead you to expect. It refers to the operating system ability to clone storage volumes. So you do not replicate virtual machine, you replicate the volume. So as I said, there was no feature of this kind in Windows so far. At that time, block level replication technology has been presented in the storage industry, but it was expensive, and it was locked to some specific hardware or software. And in Windows, at that time, before Storage Replica was implemented, Windows offered only replication at other levels. You could use file-to-file replication with DFSR. You could use applications replication with SQL Server or Active Directory, and you could use VM level replication with Hyper-V Replica. So Storage Replica is a new technology that enables replication of volumes between servers or clusters, of course, for disaster recovery purpose. With Storage Replica, you can create stretch failover clusters that can span two sites with all nodes staying in sync. Storage Replica supports, okay, we have to move to the next slide, I think. Yep. Yeah, it's just very simple scheme that we replicate actually the storage, not the whole host, but the volume. Yeah, so I see a few questions here. If you don't mind, all these questions are written here. We will come back to them. We will have a special Q&A session, and I'll answer them. Okay? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about, let's proceed. So it supports synchronous replication and asynchronous replication. Synchronous replication, it mirrors data. So if you have a low latency network with high bandwidths, and you need really the data onto sites to be onto hosts or clusters to be crash consistent. and you want to make sure that there is zero data loss at the file system level during the failure. You definitely need using synchronous replication. And asynchronous replication, it mirrors data across sites. Usually it's used for cross-site replication. Well, beyond metropolitan ranges over network links with higher latencies. But there is no guarantee that both sites have identical copies of the data at the time of failure. So some data loss is possible, and well, it's this is how it works. So I think we don't have to explain the difference synchronous and asynchronous replication. If you wish, we can talk about more in details. Yeah, so as I said, this feature is presented in 2016 Data Center Edition. Yeah, so if disaster takes one data center offline, you can move its typical workloads to the other site temporarily. So it supports stretch cluster configuration. So with Storage Replica, you can configure computers and storage in a single cluster, where some nodes share one set of asymmetric storage and some nodes share another set. What is symmetric or asymmetric storage? So this term is used in clustering. If the storage is equally accessible from every node in a cluster, it is usually referred to as symmetric storage. And as you have already guessed, the storage is asymmetric if one of multiple nodes in a cluster do not have the ability to read-write to the storage directly. So stretch cluster. This scenario can utilize storage spaces with shared SAS storage or SAN or iSCSI attached LONs. It is usually managed with PowerShell, or you can use failover cluster manager with GUI, and it allows automated workload failover. Another way is cluster-to-cluster replication, when you replicate between two separate clusters, where one cluster synchronously or asynchronously replicates with another cluster. So this scenario as well needs shared storage. And there is another one, server-to-server replication, where you have two hosts and you just replicate between two standalone servers using storage spaces with shared SAS storage or SAN or iSCSI attached LONs or even local drives. It is completely managed with PowerShell. I mean, server-to-server replication. There is no GUI for this. So it also requires manual intervention for failover. Just so stretch cluster, you can replicate between it can consist of starting from 2 and up to 64 nodes. It supports automatic failover and well cluster to cluster replication. Another by the way, let's move to the next slide. Yeah, actually not very informative slide. Let's move on. Cluster-to-cluster replication. You replicate between separate clusters, of course, between shared storage, and only manual failover is supported in this case. And server-to-server replication, you replicate just volumes, and also manual failover can be performed. Storage Replica is replicating on the block level. So that means it doesn't care what is on top of that. It doesn't care what file system is placed on top of that. It just writes takes some set of blocks, transfers them to the replica side, and writes it on the block level. So we can say if all this is performed below the file system, so block replication doesn't depend on the type of file system. It can be NTFS, it can be CSVFS or ReFS, etc. When talking about synchronous replica, at first, data has to be written to the local storage. Okay, let me double check if we have our servers back. Yeah, looks like that. Yeah, I've been telling you about synchronous replica. After, let's go here, and I've just made a simple host-to-host replication. We have D drive, only 1 gig, and we need also, for storage replica, we need a separate volume for logs, for bitmap logging. So here we store, well, bitmap is kind of array that, all the storage is divided by blocks. If there is some data written in this block, it means we add 1, and if there is this storage block is empty, we add 0, and thus we form our bitmap. And this is just required for storage replica, a separate volume, and it shouldn't be used for anything else rather than serving storage replica needs. So here we have this data D drive, so some random data here. Anyway, and we have on the other side we have a similar picture. We have also log files, but on the replica side, this D drive, it has to be absolutely equal to the primary side. It is inaccessible. We cannot open it. So we manage this storage from PowerShell only. Yeah, so, and let's say this site is down, for example. So we just, hold on. It's Ukrainian, let me switch. Yeah. Yeah, you have to run it as admin for creating and for managing storage replica. So yeah, from here you can clearly state which site is primary and which is replica site. At the moment, the first host is primary. Let's make it the primary site the second. Source RG name can be generic, so you can just give any generic name and it will not have any impact. If you are interested, all the scripts we can add to the notes to this video when it's published. So anyway, there is a lot of information on the Microsoft website, etc., on how to configure storage replica. Yeah, so are you sure you want to perform this action? Yes. And now we expect this volume to be available, and the volume on the other side will be not available. If we make some writes here, and after that we will switch our replication backwards, this data will be transferred here, and it will be available here right away. Okay, I want to add, before configuring Replica, you can run a testing tool that will, there is a set of environments. We can see them here. You need GPT volume, so GPT style partition is required. This test, it launched also from PowerShell. By the end of the test, you get this report. And if everything is fine, 20 tests, no errors, no warnings, feel free to start configuring your storage replica. So on this drive, you can place your VHDX files, you can place whatever you wish, actually, because we replicate the storage. We don't care what is the file system, what is located on this storage. Well, I think, yeah, and pros and cons of storage replica. What we have interesting here, very low system requirements. And starting from 1709 release, latest one, you can manage storage replica completely from Microsoft project Honolulu. It's a new project where you can, well, manage VMs, storage, and everything from one page. Yeah, you can use it for configuring stretch cluster, or you can use it for cluster-to-cluster replication. Also, it supports thin provisioning. So on the replica side, there will be a thin provision drive which will grow when you add some data. So on the primary side, only changes will be added on the replica side. So let's say you have like 1 gigabyte, okay, 10 gigabyte volume, but you have just 1 gigabyte of data. You replicate just what you need, not all 10 gigs. And cons, I think it's cons. You need data center edition. Without it, it will not work. Yeah, in some cases you need PowerShell, so you need, if you don't like it, it takes some time, you know, and you need to allocate a separate volume, and it's very recommended to use a separate physical disk, just to avoid for logs. It has to be at least 8 gigabytes minimum. And if you use Synchronous Replica, the performance of the storage is limited by the bandwidth of the sync channel. So that means when you write some data on the primary side, it has to be synchronized first. After that, you get acknowledged confirmation request, ACK. And after that, you can write the next portion of data on the storage. And as I said, destination volume is not accessible. Well, it's not cons, it's just how it works. All right, let's move on. Let's get back to our slideshow. Yeah, and the third one is Veeam Replica. So, well, Veeam, it's really is kind of Swiss knife for backups, for disaster recovery. You can do a lot of stuff with it. Well, in many aspects, Veeam replication is similar to incremental backup. So during the first replication cycle, Veeam backup and replication copies data of the original VM running on the source host, and it creates its full replica on the target host. And after that, you incrementally added this replica. unlike many backup files, Replica virtual disks can be stored uncompressed in their native format. And well, Veeam is very useful when you need to replicate on large distances over the one. It supports one acceleration, and it's kind of deduplicates data before transferring over the network. This is optional feature, so you can save and speed up the replication process. On Veeam website, it is stated that it's up to 50 times. Well, that of course it depends of your data that you replicate. It has, of course, it has some limitation. Well, for VMs with VHD disk only, if you change the size of VM disks on the source VM, Veeam backup and replication will delete all available restore points on the VM replica. Well, when you next time you replicate, when the next time replication job session is initiated. You cannot replicate VMs with shared virtual disks. It's not possible with Veeam. And well, you cannot use Azure Active Directory credentials. Let's say you have a hybrid cloud configuration and you have Azure Active Directory configured. So in this case, you cannot perform application-aware processing of VMs running on Windows 10 especially. Well, I want to add about snapshot mechanism in Windows Replica. Well, for VMs, of course, it supports Hyper-V and VMware vSphere. So it works with virtual machines. It replicates on the virtual layer. And for when talking about snapshots, for older Hyper-V servers like 2012 R2 or earlier, Veeam used proprietary so-called CBT or changed block tracking mechanism for well, for managing snapshots. And starting from the latest 2016 Windows Server, Veeam uses a native Microsoft Hyper-V mechanism for changed block tracking. So it's so-called resilient change tracking, or RCT. Well, I think we can move to our, yeah, of course, I have to mention cloud providers. There is a wide list of cloud providers that are compatible with Veeam. Well, cloud, it's very convenient way to store backups offsite, and you can start your virtual machine from the cloud when you, let's say you need to restore your data center and you expect some downtime. At this time, your critical VMs can be started in the cloud, and Veeam has a wide list of cloud providers. Well, there are many of them, so I will not even list them. I think we can move to our lab again. Yeah. So here we have Veeam backup and replication. It has many good features, and it requires licensing, of course. Yeah, so here we have virtual machine, Veeam VM. It's just on the first host at the moment. Just very quick, simple simple scenario when we replicate between two hosts again. Very user-friendly GUI, so no need some CLI commands or etc. Just follow the wizard. So we started replication job, and we will replicate this guy. We will replicate it to the second host. Okay. Yeah, select the storage, where to store. Here we can add a suffix. It's automatically this name will be added to the name of your virtual machine. Yeah, you can use one accelerators. It can be a hardware or software solution to decrease the amount of traffic you send over the WAN using some caching or deduplication. Yeah, so it will make sure that everything is fine. You can schedule this job automatically to run automatically, or it can be a one-time job. And let's run. Starting. It'll take maybe 1-2 minutes or so. Yeah, let's while we are waiting for replication, let's talk about requirements. There are separate requirements for different requirements for backup server and for this client, Veeam client. So for backup server, you need, well, not so much time. You need more RAM if you use like hundreds of thousands replication jobs. You need additional RAM for this. This software is developed on using .NET framework, C# language, so you need .NET framework, and you need SQL Server. And well, network bandwidth, this is very custom. That depends of your workloads, daily amount of writes you wish to replicate. Yeah, and at least 2008 SP2 or later. Okay, let's check how it's going with replication. Still replicating. Yeah, usually it's up to 5 minutes. Anyway, after this replication session ends, yes, here it is. So here we have Veeam Replica automatically created by Veeam Backup and Replication Console. Well, it's still in process. It's still not 100% over. It's still doing something. Well, we can manage our replica using just GUI interface. It's not recommended if you don't need, let's say, if you don't need this replica anymore, it's not recommended to delete it using Hyper-V Manager. It's recommended to use only Veeam console to avoid any possible issues in the future. So failover can be done from here, or you can delete it also, this replica, from using this menu. So yeah, we can failover this virtual machine. Just reason, we know the reason, just for test. So now this VM will be started while this will be shut down. Well, actually not a big deal when replicating between a few hosts. Okay, let's talk about, just summarize our information we have. pros. The first one, Veeam Cloud Connect. This is compatible. Well, you are able to replicate to the cloud. You can add cloud providers, select which one you like from the list, and replicate directly to the cloud. I think it can be unified in one because it has a very wide list of Veeam service providers. It supports different replication scenarios. You can replicate between hosts, clusters, or make some mixed environments. User-friendly GUI. There is one acceleration, and of course, Sure Backup and Sure Replica. Sure Replica. Well, it's a special feature from Veeam. It automatically tests and verifies every replica for recoverability. So after replication is over with Sure Replica test, you can be sure that this VM will be able to start, because this replication makes no sense if you cannot start over, if you cannot fail over in case of disaster. And it has RESTful API support. You need enterprise license, Veeam enterprise license. So this allows you creating, it just allows you using Veeam API to build your maybe some services or applications to manage, just to create very custom case specific replication backup scenarios. And it has PowerShell support, so you can manage it from PowerShell. And few cons, I don't know more. If you know more, you can comment. It requires licensing. It's not a free tool, but it's not actually a con. And it still cannot talk to object cloud storage, to AWS, to Azure, to huge cloud storage providers. So you have to use some intermediate object type storage, just to like virtual tape, for example, just to store your data in AWS, for example. Well, I think we have covered a lot of things today. Each of these tools deserve a separate webinar, so we just briefly walked through each of them. So let's, I see we have a few questions here. Yeah, so we have a question from Josh. Why do you need a separate volume in Storage Replica? Yes, I've talked about it. You need it for bitmap logging. Okay, other questions? Anyone? Yeah, we have a few of them. Just a moment. Opening. Does it have extended usage with PowerShell? Question from Adam. I believe this question was about Storage Replica, probably. When I was talking about Storage Replica, it was asked. Well, yes. Everything you can do with GUI, you can do the same and even more with PowerShell. So if you know PowerShell, it's very good. You can make much more use of all these tools. Okay, we have a question about StarWind. which is the best, from Peter Kuba, which is the best. I like StarWind as HA with HA that just solves it. Yeah, you can consider HA storage as kind of disaster recovery. You can use it for disaster recovery if you, let's say, make highly available storage with StarWind. You will experience zero downtime in case of disaster. Can I also have a soft copy of these slides? Adnan, Aslam, I'm not sure, Adnan. Well, anyway, this webinar will be published on the YouTube, and you all will get links. Feel free to ask your questions in the comments section. And if there are no other questions, thank you for your time, everybody, and wish you a great rest of the day. Cheers. Bye.